Hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Kinsberg, and welcome to this episode of JAKTALK. JAKTOOL is a precision product development manufacturing company focused on developing technologies for MedTech and keeping our warfighters safe. On this episode, I'm joined again by Paola Torres.
Very nice. Thank you.
Paola is a program manager focused on MedTech. And this episode is going to be focused on budgeting and investments in the product development lifecycle.
Everybody's favorite.
Nobody likes to talk about money, but we need money.
Yes.
And whether it's a small business, a startup that needs to figure out how much they got to budget for their project, or a large Fortune 500 company with internal research and development budgets that is looking to innovate and develop new items, how much do you need, right? And I think the challenge is, how much do you need and where does that get you? And how do you manage the expectations of the audience for that end result?
I'm in agreement. Yes. And you kind of hit it on the spot. And I thought that was the one thing.
The end, do great things. No. So this is a problem. And it's a problem because it's very nuanced on setting everyone's expectations. I think, we've seen situations where designing for cost. So you start ground up on a new product, and there's going to be some piece of innovation, some new science, some new intellectual property, and JAKTOOL does not do basic research. I'd say at the tail end of applied research, transitioning into commercially representative engineered prototypes, high fidelity. But there are pieces of special sauce which make all of the items we develop unique, right? That enable our customers to differentiate in the market.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes those offshoots feel like applied research. Develop a way for a coating to work, or leveraging existing coatings. Let's try a coating. Let's try a control method. Let's try a novel material or manufacturing process, and that'll give the special sauce for a potentially competitive advantage. The challenge, though, is how much do you want to invest in that, right? So, when we start off with requirements, right, and that's a great start to a project. You've got your list of requirements, and then at the end of this, you're going to match all your outputs to your inputs and say, job well done. But what often happens is if a requirement is a requirement, not that thou might be, but that thou shall must, right? If a requirement is something must cost, unit cost, make up a number, $5. And it might when you're making 10 million a month, right? But when you give the design team a very strict target cost of goods sold, right, from the beginning, and that becomes a requirement, the design team might start to deselect avenues of innovation because they don't know they don't know the roadmap of how to get there for $5, right? So you would argue that my point is that by artificially encumbering the project with a target cost from the inception.
I would say it's almost, I guess it depends, but is it like prematurely introducing that requirement?
That's the magic. When do you introduce it? And how do you not lose sight of it? So introducing a cost at the beginning will potentially stifle innovation, right? And that's fair. Like, you have a budget, the product needs to cost. It's on a commercial competitive landscape. This is what it needs to roll up to. But at the same time, how do you do innovation and development on a fixed budget and not deselect creative ideas, which then empower the team to deliver novel, right?
Are you asking me this question?
I'm asking. I've talked too much.
I don't know. I guess we've lived through a couple of things, and I feel like I've experienced I've provided too many requirements, and now I've kind of forced the team into something that I wasn't initially hoping to. I would say I'm a little guilty of that.
Can you elaborate?
Now that you say that, I can't find a specific example, but I know for sure, like I have done this
Okay.
In the past. Maybe it'll come back later in this Jack Talk episode. But yeah, like I feel like if I get requirements and they're telling me it's got to be $5 a pop, like the first thing I think about, especially with an engineering background, is, oh my God, what are the things that I know that are easy? Is it going to be injection molded? Do I have to make it easy to mold? But now I'm forcing myself to live in that.
Right.
And I'm not going to think about any other options outside of that.
Right.
So, I mean, go ahead.
So that's a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
So you're putting preconceived notions
Yes.
on what the development process looks like. And we're often approached by customers, and our customers engage JAKTOOL because we're on the problem, not in the problem. They're too close to it. They want a fresh perspective.
Yes.
And if they start giving us too much guidance, we're not going to give them fresh creativity. We've put blinders on, right? So that the challenge becomes, you say to a development team, or early on, like think of it like as an R&D team, and then for the purposes of this example, an R&D team, a development team, and then a production team. Right? So you tell the R&D team, go do great R&D things and come up with a whole bunch of concepts.
Yeah.
And they will. And the problem becomes, hey, we solved the problem. We have 3 concepts. And somebody says, why would you do these concepts? They're all X times, they're not going to scale.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got that push and pull of, do you want me to solve the problem, or do you want the problem to scale, the solution to scale? And the answer is both.
Yeah, but I think you can allow them to kind of decouple it. There's got to be some overlap at some point, but you got to let the team focus on what's important up front, which is, how do I create enough options for me to select and choose from, or I would say, if I were to give me a couple of options I can select, play around with. And then now that we're focusing over here on the development team, how do I pull the best ones that I kind of maybe see a pathway to get to my target prices? And then I would say in production, that's where you really start grinding and you start saying, okay, how do I really pull every cent and part of each cent in the millions and billions parts that I make to bring this price down?
Okay. So early on, the project stakeholders change hands.
Yes.
Right. We've seen that with our larger programs. Early on, you've got engineering folks, low level, no insult. You have more engineering like-minded folks.
Yes.
As the project gains traction, their engineering leadership starts to pay more attention. Right. It's gaining critical mass. As things are trending towards positive, it generates more interest, generates more investment, more focus. And then at some point, it checks all the boxes and says, hey, this is a real thing that can work. And then business-minded folks start to get involved, the product line owners, or things like that, and the finance folks on the customer side, and they say, okay, you got this great thing. What does it cost in production?
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I don't blame them.
And then every engineer says,
I don't know.
I don't really know, but and you're under the gun, right? You got I messed this up. I'm like, I don't know, rough order of magnitude. Maybe here's a number, and they go, well, how come
you're bringing this to me?
Bringing this to me. This doesn't meet my needs, right? But you're dealing with 2 different skill sets and 2 different points in the product development life cycle. And I think that's a little bit of something that we get caught up in here.
We do.
I think we get caught up here because, I was thinking of an example with someone else on the team this morning about, you're going to do a home renovation, right? And you go to your architect and you say, I want my home renovation to be no more than $50,000. And the architect says,
I'll try.
I can't guarantee that. I can't, and there's very clear lines of delineation of, the architect makes the designs. He says, I think cost per square foot, this is plausible. Here's your allowance for fixtures and finishes, and right. But you don't know till you get to the GC.
Yeah.
And you get your bids. Right. So you can't hate the architect, but I feel
But you're upset because the architect has now provided you with something that you're like, well, what the hell? I was looking for this budget.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right. But the way we work at JAKTOOL with a singular point of contact to help people through that development hurdles to get through the valley of death, go from requirements to low rate production, they might be dealing with you the whole time.
Yes.
And you're wearing different hats depending upon where you are in the development cycle. Right. So it's, hey, Paola's been here the whole time, and Tom has been, the project lead the whole time. I don't understand. It's different when you're dealing with, here's my architect, here's my GC, two different folks, not related, right? Compartmentalization of the process versus
we're doing all of it.
We're doing all of it. So how do you set these expectations with customers?
I feel like I've learned a lot in my last year and a half-ish year.
Share it.
I think in the beginning I made a few mistakes, many more, maybe a bit more than a few. But I've learned by the way that both you, and I give a shout out to another colleague that I have here, Vicky. She does a very seamless job at communicating these expectations. And also I've seen with some of our customers too, the way that they handle their business unit stakeholders. They'll say, listen, we've agreed to, within these funds or this effort, that we're going to execute this much, and we're hoping to reach this conclusion, but this is the effort that we hope to pull information from, and that information is valuable to the program, regardless of if it is in the right direction that you're hoping for or not. But then you provide a way that the output of this money that you're inputting is providing something of value. I think that's the expectation nowadays that I aim for, is be clear about the value that you're getting out of it, and also foreseeing how things are going to go and providing that visibility into the future. I hope that kind of...
Being clear on the value.
Yes.
Okay. So the value might not be a product. The value might be knowledge.
Yes, exactly. So it's like right now we're working on a project, and we're having we're developing parts of this new product. And I'm sure that this big entity would prefer that they get to a final point. It's like everything is perfect, but no. This particular stakeholder has said, well, what I've promised is that I will look into this component, this component, this component, and I know that I will have functional independent parts. And that's a great idea, because now you have all the functionalities. He's promised maybe that it all comes together, lightly so, and that he has promised that he will have a path moving forward outside of that. But then it's like these short, smaller deliveries that show promise towards the future. And at the same time, he's also thinking about the business side. Do I have the legal design area to work here? And are these, as you're developing, is that feasible? So he's providing us with that feedback too.
Right. So how do you avoid the conversation of, maybe you answered it. I guess it's okay. So you're dealing with a technical focused person. You check all the boxes, right? And then there are times when our customer transitions from one project lead stakeholder on their end to another.
Yes.
Right. And then it goes from, the engineering community to the program management community or the marketing community, the more business-minded folks. How do you handle the conversation? Because sometimes great customers aid the transition, right? More often than not, because these programs are so long, there's turnover within the companies, right? It could just be internally moving around the organization. It could be moving on. More often than not, when somebody moves on in a very chaotic fashion, we're left as a significant stakeholder, and it's how did we get here? Can you fill me in? Right?
Yeah, and
how do you separate the boundaries of, without looking like scapegoaty? How did we get here? Well, this is what I was told to do.
No. I mean, yes, but no, that's not the conversation that I think I would want to have. Instead, the way that I'm thinking I would go about it, it's a little bit of, well, let's discuss about the work that we've done and the value that we have contributed and how we foresee that this will fit. But I think even more so, it's understanding this new stakeholder's position and where their interests need to lie. Because ultimately speaking, we're doing work, but it's for the interest of the company that we're doing it in. So we have to find a way to see how does either the work that we've done contribute to that, and maybe are there new things that we weren't aware of? Is there new information? And realigning. It's mostly realigning with what this new stakeholders' expectations are, and having that discussion then and there when we have new information.
What criteria do you use to determine if a solution, like you're stage gating the process, how do you know if your solution is technologically mature enough to scale?
To scale.
Yeah, right. Because everybody wants the crystal ball. Hey, we've done a test. It works.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's going to say, I need to go start to plan the program, 1, 2, 3 years down the road. There's going to be funding requests. What's the likelihood this is going to work? Where do we need to, I feel, and I've said this before, our customers are
looking
relying
to us.
on us to help them see over the horizon and de-risk.
Yeah, with a little bit of, I'd say a little bit of your experience and guidance too, like you've warned me to a couple of things. Oh, are they going to need support for this product? And we're the OEM. Mm-hmm. So do we need to incorporate that? So now there's a couple of things that like pop up that I think experience has provided some insight to, but also it's a lot of questioning that stakeholder. So, how many units, you're asking me the question again, but I'm,
how do you know when you're mature enough to move forward?
Right. I think it kind of goes back to how you want to define what mature enough is.
Okay. So, build, measure, learn, feedback loop.
Yes. So exactly. So you can do a limited run and say, I'm going to test 50% of these coming out, and I'm going to say that's a successful lot. But as we keep on growing, either we find other metrics and we develop in this production process how to form that control, and feel confident with it. Do we do a DOE? It develops over. I don't think it stays the same with the increasing lots, and you start saying, I'm always going to test 1%. You might catch something in the billions that you're not going to catch earlier on, but
so a DOE is a design of an experiment, and that is validating what's been learned to date.
Sure.
Essentially. So how do you know for validating on a DOE? How do you avoid the pitfalls of like we talk about asking the 5 whys, and how do you avoid vanity metrics?
A lot of playing devil's advocate.
Okay.
I'm really good, although I have to say sometimes I do feel bad the way I poke the team, but you kind of have to start saying, well, why do we need to check that X thing has X feature when you designed it to do so? You don't have to check that in a final test report.
Right.
You designed for it. You're telling me you have checked the requirements thing, and it has the thing that you said you were going to include in there. Mm-hmm. Don't check for it. But some people
don't check for it. Does that mean look the other way?
No.
That means it should work by design intent.
Yes, of course. But also there are other parts in the requirements that'll say it needs to function as intended. And without that feature, you're not going to function as intended. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone on some of it's kind of like a whole unit. You can't look at it as each independent requirement. Mm-hmm. Are you testing for all the things, and at least for the things that you are testing, if you need to validate something else, can you just perform 1 test and cross off 3 things? Mm-hmm. I think that's the way I try to reduce the amount of scope for testing, because otherwise it gets a little overkill.
Okay. So I'll lead into this next thought of pivot or preserve with a story. Mm-hmm. So I'm a fan of Rivian, and Rivian's interesting where they're selling technology and they're selling a brand and a lifestyle. And I think the thought with them is it's not a vehicle, it's a gateway to an adventurous lifestyle.
Okay.
Right? It's more than utilitarian. It's an experience. We all want experiences. So RJ, who's CEO of Rivian, is telling this story on a podcast, and I'm going to butcher it, but the intent's really close. He's talking about building. His original vision was to build a fuel-efficient gas sports car. Mm. And as he had his team together, and they're working. I think it was about $1 million budget. They're building this car, and he knew they were going to hit their their celebration date of we completed the project. And he talks about in his interview that he knew when they were going into their celebration party to say we did it, he knew that it was obsolete, right? And he already moved on with the vision of what the brand and what the product needed to start to turn into by looking at market signals, right? So some of the projects that we work with are around so long that market conditions change or technology changes, in the beginning. So how do you know when to pivot or preserve your current path? We've done, this is like the engineers can say, we've done 3 tests, they haven't worked, right? The engineer's going to say, maybe we can do 3 more tests of different variations and continue to try, right? I think that's the creative problem solving spirit of an engineer versus the program manager looking at the budget going, I think it's time to kill it.
Yeah.
How do you know when to pivot or preserve?
You got to look at all the factors at play, and especially what's important to whatever that program is.
Okay.
I would also say part of that is having a pretty honest conversation with the stakeholders who are involved, specifically the sponsor. Because, we're at JAKTOOL and we're trying to do all these great engineering things, but personally, I'm not interested in doing them unless they contribute value to whoever it is that I'm doing this work for.
Right.
I feel excited when you feel like we as a team feel satisfied, that our customer feels satisfied. At least that's how I derive a lot of personal satisfaction from my work. And so, sometimes whenever it doesn't work and you start realizing, hey, they're kind of showing all these red flags and can't keep all eggs in one basket, you kind of start bringing up, hey, should we, where is this going? If not, where can these be leveraged? Should we shift this over to another program? Where can we get the most value out of what we're doing or we've already done? Because those are sunk costs. Or do you really want us to keep on pushing?
Right.
It's like, are you really like?
And I can see by the look on your face, you go to the customer, do you really?
I mean, tonality is a thing.
Right. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. How do you chart success or percent project completion to the customer? How do you let the customer know, typically cadence of a weekly or bi-weekly sync up meeting, besides reporting, accomplishments, what does the conversation look like with percent project completion versus percent budget versus, timeline for the program?
That was a big question.
Okay. How do you manage expectations of the customer such that you land the plane at the end of the period of performance,
the 6 months,
or the end of the budget, or the end of the cycle, where expectations of budget being
need to align with what you're delivering.
Budget aligns with delivery, aligns with timeline.
I'm gonna go back and just say, well, you kind of got to do a little bit of forecasting inside your own project too. And you have the conversation. I'm imagining with this new information, I'm seeing that I'm concerned about this risk. I think we need to add it. If we're going to add it, we're going to need to add scope, and it's going to add timeline. You have to have the continuous conversation because that's how you best manage those expectations. I find that that's the best way to deal with also budget. It's like, hey, we're seeing this issue. This issue was something we could not have foreseen. We agreed earlier in the project that we didn't want to have contingency because we had a strict budget. So now that we're here, would you prefer, we're thinking about other methods to overcome this issue, but we have to realize that there are going to be other features we can't include in order for us to deal with this critical requirement.
Sure.
That's how I'm thinking about it.
So we've talked a lot about the innovation, the design side, managing expectations. Example of a project we've had here, right? So when we're dealing with startups, especially using their own funding, a lot of people are self-investing, right? A lot of people are pulling money from retirement or a family member or pooling resources, and they're very excited to see things mature and move forward and have things to show, right? The conversation I've seen several times is they say, these are beautiful, fantastic, we're going to take the prototypes and the tech data and move forward and go get quotes to make things at high rate and go build it. And they say, whoa, you designed me a thing that's machined. It really should be extruded, or this is like the molding example, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a 3D printed thing, or it should be, So I guess where do you and I've seen people, especially like we do our best to educate people for the unknown, right? But
See it.
until our customers are completely transparent with what their roadmap looks like, it's hard to give advice. It's also hard to give advice on things that every new relationship, expectations, what's the end purpose, and the constraints. So I guess what are some best practices for creating a comprehensive funding roadmap that can take a project from development to scale? Because the example I just gave is they invested their funding, they got development articles, production
Yeah.
representative development articles.
Yeah.
They're very excited, and then they go,
Oh
I
no.
need I need more money because my next vendor's telling me I need hard tooling.
Yes. I see, I mean, it's not even just startups. I'll see it in big companies too, where they'll say, "Well, we have the idea, just go and make it." It's like, no, no, there's more funding we're gonna need. But I feel I've lived through that, especially because I didn't have the experience to be able to start asking questions. But now I feel like as a PM or whoever it is that's involved in ensuring that the project that isn't just one project, that we get a series of projects and carry it through to translate it over to the market. You have to start asking the questions to your customer, your sponsor. What's your plan? You kind of start poking them about, well, what's your business plan? Like, how do you see, when do you see this going online? And then you kind of start dropping hints gently about, hey, oh yeah, if we're going to inject this and mold this, we should account for a part of the budget to do this. And maybe we can fit that part of the schedule here. And you just one at a time.
Yeah.
So you don't scare them. But it's true. You have to start helping them because maybe it's their first time also developing a new product, especially if it's a startup. And there's no rule book on, hey, this is how you do this. And typically people are in my position because they've lived it once or twice or a few times, or like yourself, and you've done multiple of these projects. So you know from experience all the different challenges that come along the way. And I guess that's why people come to us. We've done it a couple of times. So all to say, you kind of start dropping hints and saying, hey, well, when do you think you're going to get, if we're going to end here, what do you imagine is for the next year?
Right.
Oh, if that's what you're going to get here. And I remember that you said at year 5, you want to do this. What are your thoughts on this?
Right. And you know what? I think that is, people, it's easier for people to see what the roadmap looks like when they start to see dollars. Right. So I'm always talking to you about when does the current program funding spool, when does the funding last? Let's let the customer give the customer visibility as soon as we have an idea of what's next? The future looks like, right? Because it doesn't always sink in until you see the dollars on a piece of paper. And that's like where the rubber meets the road of, do I want to continue to invest in this? Or does the product have a place in the market? Is the development process maturing well, right? Is the learning validated and showing proof of function, right? So I guess we talk about maybe that's one of the things, right? Is to early on as possible communicate what the future looks like in terms of cost and schedule, right? Because you're asking people to evaluate the cost of time and money and opportunity, right? And it doesn't always happen until they see what the funding request looks like.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And sometimes they also get surprised. They're like, I didn't think this. And I'm like, oh, I should have, in my mind, I'm like, in the beginning, at least, I feel like I would think that customers knew everything. So I'd be like, oh, you didn't think about that? Like, should have, it's my fault, like I should have said something. But I think that's something that you learn because you're doing it. There's no other way around it.
Yeah. Well, hey, I appreciate you hopping on with me today.
Of course.
Some of the so there's a book out there called The Lean Startup, which some of this thought is pulled from. I think it's a great book.
Man, I hope I aligned with whatever that book says.
You know what? I feel it's a good book, and I know it's floating around here in the office.
I'll find it.
It's one of these things where I feel like I've lived it for the last 30 years the hard way. I could have written the book if I got to it first. No. I'm
Oh,
kidding.
Jeff.
I'm kidding. So, yeah, the Lean Startup, we'll put a link down below if anyone wants to take a look at it. Paola, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me.
And thanks everyone for tuning into this episode of JAKTALK. Please take a moment to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube, and help us get the word out there as we're trying to share our knowledge on product development and manufacturing with the community. Bye.